The sad story of Jesus' death on the cross. Around 2,000 years ago, a man named Jesus was nailed to a cross and left to die. Now, this wasn't just any man. He was the Son of God who had come down to earth to save humanity from their sins. But despite being divine, he suffered and died like any other human being. He was tortured, ridiculed, and ultimately left to die a horrible and slow death. But this is where the story takes a turn, because after 3 days, something incredible happened. Jesus rose from the dead and appeared to his followers, proving that death was not the end for him or for anyone who believes in him. This story is one of the most important in history because it tells us that even when we face our own mortality, we can have hope in eternal life through faith in Jesus Christ. Now let's get into the story itself. It all started with Jesus entering Jerusalem to celebrate Passover, a Jewish holiday commemorating the exodus of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. But instead of finding the celebration joyous, Jesus began to weep as he approached the city. Why, you ask? Well, because he knew that Jerusalem was about to suffer greatly. In fact, he would later warn them that in just a few days, everything they valued would be destroyed, and not a single stone would be left upon another. His disciples, though, didn't understand this at the time, and continued to ask him questions about the temple, which was considered the holiest place in all of Judaism. They were amazed by its size and splendor, and couldn't fathom what Jesus meant when he said it would be destroyed. But Jesus had a simple answer for them. While they were focused on the grandeur of the temple, they had missed the point entirely. In fact, he told them that the true temple was made of people, not stone. And he didn't need a building to worship God, because true worshipers would one day worship God in spirit and truth. But not everyone appreciated Jesus' message. In fact, the chief priests and the Pharisees, who were supposed to be religious leaders, were plotting against him. They wanted to kill him, but they couldn't do it openly because the people loved him and saw him as a hero who exposed the hypocrisy of the religious elite. So they hatched a plan to trick him into leaving Jerusalem. They sent some of their men to tell Jesus that the Passover lambs were ready to be sacrificed, and they asked him to go to the temple and stop the slaughter. Little did they know that this was exactly what Jesus had planned. And as he headed to the temple, he used the opportunity to teach the people about salvation and warn them about the destruction that was coming. But the sad part of the story is that many people didn't listen. The chief priests and the scribes heard about Jesus' growing popularity and became furious. They couldn't stand the fact that he was stealing their power and influence over the people. So they decided to arrest him during Passover week, hoping that the Roman authorities would do their dirty work for them. They accused Jesus of blasphemy, claiming that he had made himself God, and brought him before Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. But the more Pilate learned about Jesus, the less he believed the accusations. In fact, he found the charges ridiculous and wanted to release him. However, the chief priests kept shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" until Pilate gave in and handed Jesus over to them. Pilate tried to warn Jesus that he was about to make a huge mistake, but Jesus simply replied, "You have no power over me unless it's given from above." At this point, Pilate's wife intervened, warning him to stay away from Jesus because she had heard about the miracles he had performed. But the religious leaders had already convinced the crowd that Jesus was a dangerous criminal, and they wouldn't take no for an answer. So Pilate had only one option left, to release Jesus or crucify him. In the end, he chose to play it safe and released Jesus, but only after having him beaten brutally. But the people weren't satisfied with this, and they demanded that Jesus be crucified. And this is when things took a dark turn. After being beaten and covered in blood, Jesus was forced to carry his cross to a hill called Golgotha, where he was nailed to it and left to die. The soldiers gambled for his clothes, and the religious leaders stood by watching, making sure he really suffered. For 3 days, Jesus hung on the cross, slowly losing his strength and eventually giving up on his life. It was a horrible way to die, But according to the Jewish custom at the time, the body of someone who had been crucified was supposed to be taken down and buried by their family. However, since it was the Passover holiday and the next day was the Sabbath, no one came to bury Jesus. Instead, they left him there to be eaten by dogs and birds, which is why Joseph of Arimathea, a secret follower of Jesus, came forward to request his body. He took it down from the cross, wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, placed it in a new tomb, and rolled a large stone across the entrance. Then he went home without telling anyone what he had done. The next morning, Mary Magdalene and another Mary went to the tomb to finish the burial process. They were saddened that Jesus' body had been left there for so long, but they didn't know that something miraculous was about to happen. As they approached the tomb, they saw that the stone had been rolled away and the body was gone. At first, they thought someone had stolen his body and were afraid to tell anyone. That's when Jesus appeared to them, saying, "Why are you looking for the living among the dead?" Then he told them to go and tell his followers that he had risen from the dead and would meet them in Galilee. They were overjoyed and ran to tell the others. Meanwhile, the religious leaders quickly realized that someone had stolen Jesus' body and spread false rumors that his followers had done it to cover up their guilt. But this is where the story takes a definitive turn. Jesus began to appear to different groups of people, including Thomas, who didn't believe it was really him until he saw the wounds in his hands. Even then, Thomas refused to believe that Jesus had risen from the dead until he felt his wounds and put his finger into the hole left by the nails. Finally, Jesus appeared to more than 500 people at once, including those who had seen him before, and they all testified to his resurrection. In the end, Jesus ascended to heaven and will return again to establish his kingdom on earth. This story teaches us that death is not the end for believers. If we put our faith in Jesus Christ, we can have the promise of eternal life with him. Despite facing persecution and death, Jesus never gave up on his mission to save humanity. And in the same way, we should never give up on sharing the good news of his resurrection with others. Now, I want to ask you a question. What does the resurrection of Jesus mean to you? Let me know in the comments below. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe and share this video with your friends and family. It would mean a lot to me if you could support my work. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.